Nintendo is out of control. They just whipped out their long thick ban hammer and banned a Switch 2 user for playing a used game that they bought legally. It's like buying a pre-owned car and then when you drive it down the road all of a sudden your license is suspended for some reason. In all seriousness though, this means that buying secondhand Switch games could be a risky move, but here's the catch: the ban was immediately reversed after the user proved their innocence. However, what they were required to do to prove their innocence might not be so easy for everyone else who could be affected by this. So what exactly is going on? Are you at risk of getting banned too? And is this even legal for Nintendo to do? In this video we'll answer all of your questions, but first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Nintendo bans Switch 2 owner after they played used Switch 1 games. Decision eventually reversed after quote proving innocence. This was reported on by Tom's Hardware and comes from Reddit, and I honestly almost can't believe this. Guys, if you think Nintendo has gone too far here, drop a thumbs up on the video. It helps me out a ton. I'm a tiny YouTuber, but this was posted on r/Switch 6 days ago. Switch 2 users, be careful buying used Switch 1 games. You can get banned if a bad actor dumped it. Having said that, Nintendo support is amazing and will help get you back up and running. So here's what actually happened. Okay, the user Demand they got banned and unbanned after simply downloading patches for 4 Switch 1 games that they bought from Facebook Marketplace. If you get banned, go to this support link, and I'm going to link this in the description below in case any of this happens to you guys. This link is specifically for the Americas apparently, but they say under talk to a human, select start chat. It's fast, painless, and you get a live person helping you. So much easier than getting support from Microsoft or Sony. I kind of like them taking a little jab here, okay? But as funny as this line is, this is actually like legitimately very concerning even for me. People keep calling me a Nintendo fanboy on this channel even though I've got less than 3k subs and barely make any money off of this. I'm just reporting the news, ladies and gentlemen, but this is legitimately concerning. Let's just be honest. Like, this is I think they're going way too far with this. So how did they know that they got banned and what exactly did they do? Luckily OP tells us right here in this comment. Okay, they said they inserted the games into their Switch 2 one by one and waited to patch. This was late yesterday. Today I turned on the console and was told my online services were restricted. I could not even download the whip games I bought. I don't know what whip games are. Do they mean Switch games? I don't know. I contacted Nintendo support and found out I was banned. They had me pull up the Facebook Marketplace listing and take some pics of the cartridges. The whole process was painless and fast. This commenter says in cases like this, Nintendo does request proof of purchase of the games in question. Even if it's just an online listing, it doesn't always guarantee a resolution, but in some cases they can determine that you were not at fault or at least acted quote in good faith when purchasing the used games. This is really scary. This is really scary, guys. The Switch has been around for 8 years now. How many of you don't even remember which Switch games you bought that were used and not used? Like, what if I bought a used game from GameStop 2 years ago? I don't even remember that it was used and I haven't played it in a long time, and I pop it in and in that period of time it was determined that that cartridge was used for whatever illegal reason, and now it's banned and now I'm banned, and how am I supposed to prove it? It was 2 years ago. I don't have a receipt. I don't think half the GameStops in my city are closed now. I live in New York City. There was one near K-Town that's closed. The one near me on Steinway in Astoria is closed. GameStops are closing left and right. How am I gonna be even if I remember that it was purchased used, how am I supposed to get a receipt? What if I bought the game at a yard sale and I simply do not have proof of purchase? Like I can't prove it. I'm hoping that this user is incorrect here. Hopefully they only need a picture of the actual game in your possession. Like maybe I take a picture, a little selfie. Oh, look, it's me. I actually am the owner of this. Like, hopefully that's enough, because if you actually need some sort of proof of purchase, whether it's like a Facebook listing or the Facebook messages, like Craigslist message, I don't know, but like, hopefully this is untrue, because if it's true, that's insane. That could screw over a lot of people in the future if they don't change this policy. This user said getting your console/account banned for utilizing secondhand games is hardly painless. It's actually really on Nintendo's part. Anyone okay with this happening is insane, and I again 100% agree here. This is way stepping over the boundary. Okay, that's everything that happened, but how did this even happen in the first place? Like, what caused those specific game cartridges to flag this user's account and get them banned from Nintendo? Well, it all has to do with how Nintendo flags each individual cartridge. Okay, Nintendo's anti-piracy system assigns each physical Switch game cartridge a unique identifier. So literally the actual cartridge itself has a unique identifier to this specific copy of Pokemon Brilliant Diamond. Allegedly, if the same game's ID appears online from two devices at once, Nintendo's servers presume a copied or pirated game is being used, obviously because they've only manufactured one of this specific ID ever. So the only way this physical cartridge could be online in two places at once is if piracy is involved. If I'm wrong about that, you can comment down below. In practice, this means that malicious sellers, in this case from Facebook Marketplace, have used devices like the MiG Switch to rip a Switch game's data before selling the cartridge secondhand. When the unsuspecting buyer of that cartridge later goes to use that cartridge on their Switch 1 or their Switch 2, of course the console will connect online and attempt to download any relevant patches for that specific cartridge. Well, Nintendo's going to detect a duplicate of that ID because now the unsuspecting user has the physical cartridge and the pirate has the ripped cartridge, and they're both online simultaneously. Nintendo doesn't know which of the two apparently is the legitimate copy, which is like insane. So this means that the console of the new cartridge owner is automatically flagged for piracy and they are banned from Nintendo's online services. That means the new owner of this pirated copy cannot access multiplayer in their multiplayer games. They can't access eShop downloads. They can't patch their games that they're trying to play, and they can't use other internet features available on their Switch or Switch 2, effectively bricking its online functionality. Now, allegedly the ban targets the console hardware itself, and I don't actually know that. It could just be the user's account. I'm really not sure. You guys can let me know in the comment section below how that works. But the key here is that Nintendo's official stance on this is that these online bans are permanent, even though technically, as the Reddit user discussed earlier, you can contact Nintendo support and prove that you did not pirate these games, and if you can do that, then of course they will go ahead and reverse it, but they do reserve the right to make these online bans permanent, which is actually insane. I mean, this is literally punishing legitimate consumers for a previous owner's piracy related actions. Imagine buying a used car, okay, and the previous owner was speeding and now you have to pay their speeding ticket and you get points on your license. Like, what is the logic behind this? I don't understand. So then I got curious, right? Then I started to wonder, like, okay, is this even legal? Like, surely this can't possibly be legal for Nintendo to ban a user's access to their services when you've legitimately bought the Switch or Switch 2, you've legitimately bought a used copy of the game. Like, it's not illegal to buy a used copy of a game, right? Like, you've done everything right. So how could Nintendo legally limit your access and the functionality of your console and your games if you've not broken the law? That sounds insane, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at, is this likely to be legal in the United States, and is this likely to be legal in the EU? Because there is a difference, as you guys know if you watched my Ubisoft video where we discussed their end user license agreement and how it forces you or legally compels you to destroy your physical game discs. Okay, if you guys missed that video, check it out on the channel. It's actually hilarious, and if you did watch that video, some of this may sound familiar to you, but I do want to remind you guys that this video that you're watching right now, this is not legal advice. Okay, this video is purely for entertainment. I am not a lawyer. This is absolutely not legal advice in any way. Some of the information in this video might not even be completely accurate. Okay, I am not a professional here. I am top 3 biggest goofballs of all time. There's no way that this is legal advice. All right, but let's take a deep dive into whether or not could potentially be legal or not in the United States. Okay, in the US, Nintendo's actions are largely grounded in contract and intellectual property law. When users set up a Switch 2 and use Nintendo's online services, they must agree to Nintendo's end user license agreement. That's right, the famous EULA EULA, ladies and gentlemen, just like we saw in the Ubisoft video, and you also have to agree to Nintendo's terms of service. Now these agreements grant Nintendo broad discretion to restrict or terminate service for violations, including the use of unauthorized copies or hardware modification. In fact, shortly before the Switch 2's launch, Nintendo updated its user agreement to explicitly state that it may render a console or services, quote, permanently unusable if the user bypasses protections or uses unapproved software / hardware. The prohibited activities in the EULA include copying or modifying Nintendo software, using unauthorized accessories like flash cartridges, right, or using pirated game data. As usual, Nintendo is going full scorched earth. Their new terms impose a strict no tolerance policy. Anyway, in short, under the contract that the user accepted when they set up their Switch 2, Nintendo can ban a console that it determines is in violation of those rules. In other words, it's up to Nintendo to determine if you are following their rules or not the law. That's the contract that you agreed to. So attempting to play a flagged or duplicate cartridge arguably falls under unauthorized copies, even if the new user was unaware that the cartridge was used for unauthorized copies. From an intellectual property perspective, Nintendo's approach aligns with anti-piracy enforcement. US copyright law and DMCA allows rights holders to employ technological measures to prevent piracy theft. If a cartridge's ID is cloned, Nintendo is protecting its copyright by blocking what it perceives to be a duplicate in use. Notably, US law also recognizes, quote, the first sell doctrine, Title 17 US Code Section 109, which gives purchasers the right to resell legitimate copies of copyrighted works like game cartridges. Okay, so buying or selling a used genuine game is legal. Nintendo cannot forbid the resale of a lawful copy. However, apparently the first sale doctrine limits distribution control, not usage of online services. So in other words, they can't prevent you from buying or selling the game that was illegally ripped, but they reserve the right to prevent you from using their online services. In other words, owning a game copy doesn't guarantee the right to its online features if the provider's terms bar access due to anti-piracy measures. So while you have the right to own and resell a physical game, Nintendo can still refuse service to a console that triggers its anti-piracy detection system. So right now, at the time of recording this, there is no United States law explicitly prohibiting Nintendo from banning users or consoles in this manner. Companies generally have a lot of wiggle room here to enforce EULAs in the United States and terminate online services for suspected violation. Courts in the US have often upheld EULAs and terms of service as long as users consented, even if the terms are harsh. You probably didn't even know you consented to this BS. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Nintendo's ban could be seen as a contractually agreed consequence of using a potentially pirated copy of a game. Now, if you're an affected customer, your recourse here is pretty limited. Now, luckily, it seems like Nintendo at least has an avenue for resolving this without having to like get a lawyer, right? You just go to the support page, and as long as you can prove that you purchased these copies legally and it's within your right to access this, then of course Nintendo just removes the ban, right? Like if you could do that, fantastic. But like I said earlier in the video, how many of you have your receipts for games that you bought 6, 12, 18, 24 months ago? I guess you could technically try suing for wrongful termination of service, but a lawsuit would face their EULA. Nintendo is probably going to argue that the user breached the agreement even unknowingly by using a flag game. I did a quick online search, okay, so this could be wrong, but allegedly there are no known US cases that challenge a ban under these specific circumstances. So technically Nintendo's policy is currently considered lawful in the United States and most regions, absent of a successful legal challenge. Again, I'm not a lawyer, okay, and this is not legal advice. All that being said though, some aspects of Nintendo's policy do raise some legal questions under US law. So for example, Nintendo's EULA forbids extracting ROMs, which is often just making copies of games that you own, okay, and treats it as a bannable offense. Yet many argue that making a personal backup of software you own legally is protected in the US either as fair use or under Title 17 US Code Section 117, which allows archival copies of computers programs. And so if indeed no law was broken by the secondhand user, they neither pirated the copy, right, and they didn't circumvent any protection themselves, one could argue that Nintendo is overreaching here. I mean, that's an understatement, wouldn't you say? I think we could all agree that this is a massive overreach by Nintendo. All they did was buy a used copy, which is legal, and they put it into their console, which they purchased legally, and they got banned. Sounds like a massive overreach to me. I don't know. However, even if copying a ROM for personal use is arguably legal, right, using a cloned ID simultaneously on two systems crosses into unauthorized use. One of those two people's unauthorized for show. Moreover, the DMCA's anti-circumvent provisions, Title 17 US Code 1201, make it illegal to bypass technological measures like Nintendo's cartridge security. The original owner who cloned the game likely violated DMCA, obviously, and Nintendo is within its right to target that specific activity. The innocent purchaser is caught in the crossfire, but allegedly US law doesn't offer a clear shield for that situation. Now, as far as I know, and again, I don't know anything, I'm top 3 most clueless YouTubers on the planet, okay, but apparently a private company's ban of a user doesn't trigger constitutional due process because they're a private company. So consumer protection laws in the United States are relatively weak here, just like we discovered in the Ubisoft video. So TLDR, okay, because you accepted the end user license agreement when you set up your Switch or Switch 2 and you agreed to their terms of service, apparently this isn't explicitly illegal for Nintendo to do. Technically speaking, I think it seems allegedly legal that Nintendo could do this in the United States, which is wild to me. Holy shit. But now let's talk about whether or not what Nintendo is doing is considered legal under European Union law. In the EU, the scenario is more nuanced due to stronger consumer protection and different copyright principles. Just like the United States, Europe allows resale of physical genuine copies of games under the copyright exhaustion first sale doctrine. Once a game cartridge is first sold by Nintendo or with Nintendo's consent in the EU, apparently Nintendo's exclusive distribution right is exhausted, meaning it cannot prevent further resale of that specific copy. So the secondhand buyer has every right to own and play that copy of the game, obviously. So if that legitimate copy triggers a ban, it raises flags under EU law about the fairness and proportionality of Nintendo's action. Contractual terms that give Nintendo sweeping power to ban or disable products may be scrutinized under the EU's Unfair Terms and Consumer Contracts Directive. Consumer contracts in Europe cannot impose disproportionate detriment or deprive consumers of statutory rights. A clause allowing Nintendo to permanently cut off online access, effectively reducing the value of a product the consumer paid for, could apparently be deemed an unfair term if it causes a significant imbalance to the consumer's detriment contrary to good faith. And like we said before, the user in this case purchased the game in good faith. They just went on Facebook Marketplace and bought the games. It is what it is. Now, it's worth noting that Nintendo's updated EULA is problematic in the context of the European Union because EU law does explicitly permit certain actions by consumers. For example, making a backup copy of software you own under the EU software directive. If a company's terms purport to forbid even lawful acts, EU courts likely won't enforce that part of the EULA. For instance, Nintendo's blanket ban on all ROM extraction or hardware modifications conflicts with EU recognized rights. Like, it's my software, I paid for it, I'm just making a backup copy in case this one gets water damage or something like that. Now, in the past, the EU Court of Justice held that technological protections should not overreach. Anti-piracy DRM is only legally protected if it targets piracy and does not unduly interfere with legitimate uses of a product. That seems like a slam dunk for protection in the EU from this BS that we're talking about in this video. I mean, look, banning a console or an account that connects with a duplicated cartridge could be seen as a disproportionate response in the EU if it punishes an innocent owner or blocks lawful uses. EU regulators could simply ask, could Nintendo protect its IP with a less restrictive measure? Of course they can. For example, instead of a full ban on a console's online functionality or an account's full access to the online services, a more proportionate approach might be to block this specific game ID from online play. So sure, it would suck that like you couldn't use the online for the specific cartridge that you bought, but at least you still have online access on your account or your console or whatever. And so if you're in the EU, this could be something that they would argue, right? Like, there's clearly a less invasive and less harsh way that they could accomplish their goals of their anti anti-piracy desires. Okay, furthermore, the EU has a lot stronger consumer rights for digital services and goods than the United States does. I'm gonna tell you that. They're like 10 years ahead of us on this in this regard. Okay, under the sale of goods directive and digital content directive in force since 2022, apparently consumers are entitled to products that conform to the contract and to legal standard. If a Switch 2 is advertised to play Switch 1 cartridges and access online features, but using a legitimately purchased cartridge results in loss of online functionality, one could argue that the product is not in conformity with reasonable expectations. That is exactly what happened here. Okay, the reveal of the Switch 2, Nintendo could not stop talking about Switch 1 games, which was honestly a big disappointment for a lot of people. They're over here talking about like the only new thing we got here was basically Mario Kart World and like what, welcome tour. Okay, the rest of the Switch reveal, the Switch 2 reveal and launch was like older games that were on the Switch 1 already. So like the backwards compatibility was a big selling point of the Switch 2, and you're legally allowed to buy copies, use copies of Switch 1 games. Okay, so like it's almost like false advertising at that point, right? Like you told me I could play Switch 1 games, and used game cartridges are legal to purchase, so I bought a used game, I put in my Switch 1 cartridge, and I can play it. Straight to jail, Nintendo, straight to jail. Now Nintendo would probably pull some BS, right? They would probably counter and say that the user was the one that breached the terms by using a compromised cartridge. Okay, so the lack of service is actually the user's doing. That's the slimy thing that they would probably try to do there. So the fairness of that stance could be tested under EU law. Notably, some jurisdictions might consider that a buyer who unknowingly purchases a defective secondhand product, in this case a game that was previously misused, should not bear the entire loss. While EU consumer law mostly covers B2C sales, and a Facebook marketplace sale from a private seller may not be protected by warranty laws, the overarching ethos in Europe is to protect good faith customers against unexpected detriments. Of course, no EU court case has tackled this exact scenario, but there are signs that such policies face legal scrutiny in Europe. Now, notably, the Brazilian Consumer Protection Agency's recent challenge to Nintendo, though obviously they are outside of the EU, okay, Brazil's consumer laws share a similar spirit, and their challenge to Nintendo is telling. Brazil is arguing that unilaterally disabling consoles for TOS violations violates consumer rights. Now, Brazil challenging Nintendo here is obviously not related to this specific Reddit case. Okay, there was a whole thing where a bunch of Nintendo Switch 2 consoles were getting bricked remotely by Nintendo after purchase. Okay, that's a whole other story that plenty of other YouTubers have covered, so I'm not going to jump into that here, but that is exactly what Brazil was responding to here. Okay, in the same vein as that, European consumer authorities could make a comparable argument under their laws, saying that it is abusive to cancel or restrict services without a clear justification and process, and that innocent purchasers should not be caught in the crossfire. Apparently, EU law often requires that if a service is terminated, the consumer must be given a reason and an opportunity to remedy the issue. So here, Nintendo's system issued a blunt automated ban, while Nintendo's user agreement in Europe also likely contains the anti-piracy clauses. Any enforcement would need to be consistent with EU customer protection. A term allowing Nintendo to brick or permanently ban a console from online services might not be enforceable if judged unfair. And luckily for Nintendo, as the Reddit user posted, there is a route that you could go to prove that you legitimately bought the copies, and this is effectively a remedy to the issue that doesn't have to go through a whole legal process, which is good. Maybe that's why Nintendo is offering a way to unban people that this happens to, because it's not legal in Europe. I don't know. So all in all, okay, under EU law, Nintendo's ban policy is probably on much shakier ground. So while today Nintendo's ability to ban someone for a flagged cartridge is arguably, maybe, potentially, allegedly legal, since no court has struck it down and some users did agree to some terms, it could be challenged as disproportionate and unfair to customers, because allegedly European law explicitly protects one's rights to resell their games and make lawful personal copies, and it requires anti-piracy measures to avoid harming legitimate use. Punishing a secondhand purchaser who had no idea of the game's past misuse seems to undermine those principles in the EU. We might not be that far off from seeing European consumer organizations or courts demand that Nintendo amend its practices, because that's exactly what Brazil is already doing in a completely separate case. So at the end of the day, Nintendo's EULA might be legally enforceable in the United States, and it might be on shakier ground in the EU. you. So let's take a look at what more Reddit users had to say about this over on r/switch. It's good to know they will work with you. What sort of proof do you need? Receipts or anything like that? I haven't been bit yet, but I do buy used games on occasion, usually from GameStop or eBay. And the OP responded saying marketplace listing, and I snapped a pic of the games. Yeah, this could really screw over GameStop. Going to be interesting. This commenter says the number of pirated/duplicated games out there is pretty small. Odds of you getting someone that did it and is selling their used game would be pretty slim. Congrats, you won the lottery. Yeah, and that's true, right? So like this, you know, we could be making a mountain out of a molehill here, right, by talking about like legal issues and all that other stuff, right? Like this really realistically, this is probably not going to affect any one of you watching this video, but it's a non-zero chance, right? Like it's not zero, depending on how many of you watch this. Like it could be one of you, okay? Even if it's only a 1% chance, just look at the number of views on this video and take 1% of that. That's way too many people. That's way too many people. OP responds saying lol, thanks, didn't feel like a lottery win when I couldn't even access the eShop and through no fault of my own. Like it didn't tell me I'm banned. The message you get is completely incorrect. It's just insane. It's just insane, right? In my personal opinion, right, why is it not the case that Nintendo just bans the specific ID of the cartridge? Why is it a complete ban of online access? Like that just blows my mind. Like look, I understand that piracy is illegal, right? I recently made a video talking about how they took down one of the biggest Switch piracy websites. If you missed that video, go ahead and check it out because that was actually crazy as well. But like I get it, right? I get that a company wants to and has to protect its intellectual property, of course, right? Like it's literally, it's the law that you can't pirate games, and I think companies should be able to go after people or places or services that you know break the law when it comes to piracy. Sure, I'm totally with Nintendo on that one, right? But where Nintendo loses me is where they're overreaching with stuff like this when there's a much better solution involved here, right? It would be just as easy for Nintendo to ban that specific ID instead of just banning the entire console or account or whatever's access to the Nintendo Online. You can't even download patches to your games because you bought a used game from GameStop. You didn't know that the person that before you used it for piracy purposes. Like at that point, you're just being a scumbag. Like that's literally, I can't arrive at any other conclusion, right? Both things can be true. I can support Nintendo for wanting to protect their intellectual property, and at the same time I can also agree that like this is bull, right? This is absolute bullshit. You are just spitting in the face of your customer because you have a better strategy and you are opting to not use that strategy in favor of the more heavy-handed approach. For what reason? Just to piss people off, and then videos like this get made and people watch it and people think, wow, Nintendo sucks, right? This is an instance of Nintendo just shooting themselves in the foot, because again, I'm all for protecting their intellectual property. Sure, go ahead. Like I understand that it's required and IP is valuable to a company like Nintendo, right? But now you've just made yourself the bad guy for no reason. Now, just to be clear, because this seems to be a point of confusion for people, you are still allowed to lend people your copy of a game, right? So just because I have this copy with this unique ID and I lend it to my friend, right? Just because this unique ID pops up on their console, a second console, that doesn't mean that I'm going to get banned for piracy, right? It's because this specific ID is only allowed to be present on one console at a time. As long as it's one console at a time, you're good. The problem is when this specific ID shows online on two consoles simultaneously. That's when there's a problem here, okay? And the reason I say that is because this commenter said this is so stupid, so now people get banned for legitimate games. I agree. And what happens when you lend that game to a friend and they put it in their Switch? People in the comments calling Nintendo to sort it out is painless and it's not a big deal. Truly leave me at a loss for my words. And this person responds saying they get banned when the game ID shows up as playing on two different Switches at the same time, hence the whole MIG Switch fiasco with them using dumped games. So legitimate lending games to a friend is fine since you won't be playing the same physical game ID at the same time. The OP post may be true or may not, but the fact is still there that the chance that the secondhand game bought could have been previously dumped and could possibly get your console banned if the person playing the dumped game is doing so when the person is playing the legitimate cartridge at the same time. Now I guess if you have a really bad friend, they could borrow your copy and then MIG Switch dump the files, right, and then give it back to you, okay, and then next thing you know you're banned, and that's because your buddy's an a-hole, right? So if you're gonna share your games with your friend, friends, just be clear with them, like, look, don't get me banned. Okay, that's insane that you have to think about that though. Now this person said, so assuming this is real, and the only reason why I'm believing it is because I saw another post yesterday about someone getting banned for a used game. Why would they need to see the listing you bought it from? Isn't a picture of the game enough, possibly with some written verification message besides it, prove that it's real? Also, what if the listing was taken down? Would you have been screwed over? The OP responds saying, I assume you wouldn't be because there's still chat history and then you have the physical card in your possession, but I don't know. But here's my question, right? And this is where things get so stupid, and this is why Nintendo's so dumb. Okay, let's assume that I'm the pirate. Okay, I rip my copy of Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, I take a picture of the cartridge, I take a picture of the box, I take a picture of my receipt. I bought this at Target. Okay, so I have all the original purchase information, and then I sell it on Facebook Marketplace, and then the other person gets banned. Okay, and they try to reverse that, and then what if I get banned? I could just show my actual original proof of purchase. Like, bro, this is so stupid, Nintendo. Oh my god. Now for those of you who are wondering what happened to this user, okay, are they able to use those cartridges again? The answer is apparently yes. Someone said, what did they tell you about the cartridges? Can you use them again? And OP responds saying, yep, the cartridges are fine. I asked and was told I can even resell them. Someone responds saying, I believe they unlink the cart from the original Switch, which then renders it unplayable on that Switch or something along those lines. This is unverified. Nobody responded to this, so I don't know if that's true, but that would make the most sense logically. Now some users on Reddit are saying that this story is actually fake. Okay, this user said, after speaking to Nintendo today regarding the matter, I'm calling absolute BS on this. They have no recollection of this and all the news articles are false. The statement I was given was Nintendo do not have the power or will to unban any console in their Nintendo Switch family. They are claiming this post and the articles are for attention and false. Conveniently, this user doesn't show any screenshots of them reaching out to Nintendo, so that's weird. Also, they say Nintendo has no recollection, as if all Nintendo employees have access to all chat history at all times. That's insane. Okay, that is insane. Just to give you guys a little bit of perspective of where I'm coming from and why I think that that's BS is because I used to be a tier 2 support for Apple. I was in physical locations working directly with end users, repairing their physical hardware. Okay, so we're talking about MacBooks, we're talking about Mac Pros, we're talking about iMacs, iPhones, right? Just repairing iPhones. So I was doing all of that. Okay, and I could see most backend data as long as I had the serial number of a specific device. So if somebody had their screen replaced, if I wanted to look up that information, you would need some form of identifiable information to look up that specific case, right? So let's say my screen was replaced on June 7th 2022. The only way that I would be able to see the repair notes for that specific repair would be if I had the serial number of the replacement, if I had the repair number, if I had like some other form of identifiable information about the customer, perhaps their email, maybe, right? But the less specific details they give me, or gave me, I should say, I don't work there anymore, the harder it would be to find the specific repair notes for a specific product. And so in the same way, I suspect support logs for Nintendo are recorded in a similar fashion, right? They're probably recorded under, you know, the person who contacted them, either their email, their phone number, or the, you know, the serial number of their device, or whatever the case might be, right? And so if this infamous heart person reached out to Nintendo, the person that they're reaching out to, the only way that they'd probably be able to verify if this is real or not would be if this Reddit user could provide them with the information from OP, right? Like OP's email or OP's Switch serial number or something like that, have them look up on the back end if this ever actually was reported, right? Like they can't just control F through all of support issues forever, going all the way back to the NES, right? It's just not going to happen. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm not saying that this person's lying or that they didn't reach out to Nintendo. I'm just saying that, like, you got to take support's answer with a grain of salt here. Like, I don't think there's any possible way that any specific single support agent could know or verify the legitimacy of any other support claims without having specific details about that case that you could identify, like a serial number, email address, phone number, whatever. This user responds saying, I don't believe it's true either. Actually, I'm sifting through the comments at the bottom of the post because it seems like the most upvoted stuff are people taking everything at face value. I just can't figure out what the motive would be to lie about such a thing, unless he just hates Nintendo and wants to spread fear amongst the users who purchased used games. I just think it would be massively risky to ban people for purchasing used games from GameStop, Amazon, Gamefly, eBay, etc. Seems like a class action lawsuit waiting to happen. I feel like the EU would have some kind of protection protection for users against stuff like this too. So this person doesn't believe it's real, but they don't expressly state why. They just feel like it's fake, even though Nintendo has a history of being extremely heavy-handed with anti-consumer practices and being extremely heavy-handed with anti-piracy measures. So I don't know, I think that it is more likely to be real than not. I don't know what makes this person feel like it wouldn't be real. This person said, it's the statement Nintendo gave me. Even with the previous Nintendo Switch systems, not one banned console was unbanned. Lol. OP is attention/karma farming. All it is, there's just no way to know that. Like, you're saying the Nintendo Corporation solemnly swears under oath to you, famous-heart-6368, that they've never unbanned a Switch console. That's not even what OP said. OP didn't even say that their Switch was banned. They said that they were banned from accessing online features. It could just be their account was banned. This person goes, would you post some screenshots of the statement Nintendo gave you? Sorry, I didn't take any, but if you want to message them yourself, they will say roughly the same as they said to me. So this person says, so you're just as trustworthy as OP. If you can't provide proof, how do I know you even talked to a real person? And then this person says, I did the same as the post above. I didn't take screenshots, but I can confirm they told me they can't check the status and would be escalated and they would email me. Why didn't I take screenshots? Quite frankly, it was later at night and didn't want to bother with removing my name from the chat. Oh God. Okay, he says, she said, listen, at this point we're just rambling and people are just arguing online because they're stupid. Did this actually happen? I don't know. I would argue that it probably happened. Allegedly, other people have reported similar things. Nintendo is known for doing exactly this type of behavior. This only got 871 upvotes. It's not like this is changing this Reddit user's life. Okay, so there's just no actual motivation to be lying about this. Like, why would they go through the effort? Like, let's assume that they were lying for upvotes, right? Why would they be praising Nintendo at the end of it? Having said that, Nintendo support is amazing, so much easier than getting support from Sony or Microsoft. Like, the logic there is not logicking. It's not lining up, right? If the idea is that they're karma farming some easy Nintendo hate, okay, then why would they be praising Nintendo at the end of it? It doesn't make any logical sense. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. I bet that this is real, but I can't prove it, obviously. I mean, it's the internet, so I mean, who knows, right? Anyway, let me know in the comment section below what you guys think about this. Is this actually insane? Is this even real? Let me know in the comment section below. I personally think this probably did happen. I personally think that it's probably easy to get Nintendo to reverse this, but you do probably need some sort of proof of purchase, or at least sending them pictures of the actual cartridge. I personally have no idea if this is actually legal on Nintendo's part or not, because I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice. You should contact a lawyer if you're concerned about this, but I personally think that if Nintendo is doing this, they need to stop immediately. Okay, if you're gonna do anything to fight piracy, just ban the unique ID of the cartridge itself. Don't ban entire accounts. Don't ban entire consoles. Why would you take such a heavy-handed approach to something that could be handled in a much more nuanced and safe way, in a way that doesn't get you any backlash but still gets you the same result? It makes no sense to me, bro. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and while you're down there, drop a thumbs up on the video. It really helps out the channel a ton. It will help get this video out to the YouTube algorithm so other gaming news enjoyers might see it. It might help warn other Nintendo Switch 2 users as well. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell to be notified the next time I upload more gaming news content. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.